The midday sun burned hot against the glossy red hood of the 1969 Corvette. It sat in the middle of the millionaire's driveway like a trophy from another life, gleaming, perfect, but dead silent. Derrick stood beside it, wiping his hands on his work overalls. 33 years old, African-American, former Army mechanic, the kind of man who didn't say much, but when he did, every word mattered. "Think you can fix it?" The voice came sharp, entitled. Richard Holloway, white, billionaire businessman, 60 years old. He looked at Derrick like a man looks at a tool he didn't ask for. Derrick smiled. "If it's got an engine, sir, it can run." Richard laughed loud enough for everyone on the estate to hear. "Tell you what," he said, "you make this thing run again, and it's yours." The people standing nearby chuckled. The gardener, the housekeeper, a few guests. They thought it was a joke, but Derrick didn't. He just nodded and bent down to check the hood latch. Richard's smirk deepened. He whispered to his friend, "Watch this. Let's see how long before he gives up." And in that moment, something shifted. The laughter around him wasn't just about a broken car, it was about him. The way they looked at him. The way they didn't expect him to succeed. Still, Derrick didn't say a word. He just ran his hands across the old metal, like a surgeon finding a heartbeat. Then the camera pans in, the quiet before everything changes. A man, a machine, and a test that would expose the ugliness beneath a rich man's smile. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe. Because what happened next, nobody saw coming. As Derrick opened the hood, a wave of memories hit him. His dad's garage back in Atlanta, the sound of jazz from a broken radio, the smell of oil and sweat. This wasn't just another car, this was his piece. And maybe, just maybe, his chance to prove something bigger. Richard leaned back against his Rolls-Royce, sipping champagne, eyes full of smug amusement. "You've got 2 hours, champ," he said. "Let's see if that army training's worth anything." Derrick took a slow breath. He'd fixed broken tanks in the desert, rebuilt engines during sandstorms. But nothing prepared him for the kind of storm that was about to come from this driveway. He turned the wrench once, twice. Something clicked, not in the engine, but in him, because this wasn't just about fixing a car. It was about dignity. It was about being underestimated one time too many. He whispered under his breath, "You'll see." The moment Derrick touched that Corvette, he had no idea the bet was never meant to be fair, because behind that shiny hood was a trap designed to humiliate him. The hood creaked open, revealing a nest of dust, rust, and something worse, missing parts. The carburetor was gone. The battery cables were deliberately cut. Half the ignition system had been pulled out like someone had sabotaged it on purpose. Derrick froze. He wasn't stupid. He saw what this was. This car didn't just stop running. Someone wanted to make sure it never would. Richard folded his arms, grinning. "Well," he said, "still think you can fix it?" His voice dripped with arrogance. The other men laughed, their expensive watches catching sunlight as they clapped him on the back. Derrick looked up, calm but sharp. "You sure you want me to fix it, sir?" "Oh, I insist," Richard replied. "After all, I did promise you the car if you make it run." "Not that you will." The laughter rose again. Derrick took a slow breath. He'd faced worse than this. He'd been called names by drill sergeants who didn't think a black soldier could lead a team. He'd been passed over for promotions because clients preferred someone else. He'd learned to channel that pain into focus. So that's what he did. He opened his toolbox, his own, worn but spotless. Every tool had a story. As he worked, he could hear the whispers behind him. "Bet he gives up in 10 minutes. Guy probably doesn't even know what a fuel line is. Should have called a real mechanic." Every word stung. Every word made his hands steadier. He traced the wiring, checked the valves, ran diagnostics in his head. Then something caught his eye. A faint silver mark near the battery housing. A manufacturer's code. This wasn't the original engine. It had been replaced. And badly. A patchwork of mismatched parts. A Frankenstein job done by someone with money but no patience. He realized what Richard was doing. This wasn't about the Corvette. It was about the spectacle. A rich white man setting up a poor black mechanic to fail just for entertainment. Derrick stood up, locking eyes with him. "You replaced the engine." Richard chuckled. "Oh, did I? You must have X-ray vision, soldier." "No," Derrick said quietly. "Just experience." The smile on Richard's face faltered for a moment. Then he waved his hand dismissively. "You've got 1 hour left, hero." The clock ticked. The air grew heavy. Sweat rolled down Derrick's forehead, but his mind raced faster than the seconds. He started pulling apart panels, hands moving with a rhythm that was almost musical. Every click of a wrench was a word unspoken, a message to everyone watching. I've been underestimated before. Every time, they were wrong. An hour later, Richard returned, sipping another glass of champagne. "How's my Corvette?" Derrick looked up, his face unreadable. "Almost alive?" "Almost," Richard repeated mockingly. "Like your chances." But something about Derrick's tone, quiet, sure, made a few of the guests exchange glances. He wasn't bluffing. He knew something they didn't. Derrick leaned over the car one last time, connected a cable, and took a deep breath. He twisted the key. Click. Silence. Then a loud pop. Smoke poured from the exhaust. Richard burst out laughing. "I knew it. I knew it." But Derrick didn't look embarrassed. He just looked patient. He leaned back, wiped his hands again, and said softly, "Sir, I think you should step back." When the engine finally roared, it wasn't the sound that stunned everyone. It was what happened next. Because that roar revealed a secret Richard never wanted anyone to know. Everyone stepped back, half laughing, half confused. The Corvette coughed once, twice, then it roared. A deep, raw sound ripped through the quiet neighborhood, the kind of sound that shakes something in your chest. Heads turned. The guests froze. The gardener stopped mid-rake. Even the housekeeper peeked out the window. Richard's smile vanished. He looked at Derrick like he was staring at a ghost. "Wait, what did you do?" Derrick didn't answer. He just stood there, eyes fixed on the engine, watching it come back to life like it had been waiting for this moment. That car wasn't just running. It was purring, smooth, strong. Richard blinked, disbelief spreading across his face. "That's impossible," he muttered. "It was a dead engine." Derrick finally spoke, his voice calm and even. "You replaced the engine but never aligned the timing chain. The whole system was choking itself." He looked up. All it needed was a mind that knew what it was doing. For a long second, nobody spoke. The same people who had laughed earlier just stared, silent now, awkward, some even embarrassed. Then, slowly, Derrick turned off the ignition and stepped aside. "You said if I make it run," he said quietly. "It's mine." Richard's jaw tightened. The words hung heavy in the air. He forced a chuckle. "You're kidding, right?" Derrick didn't blink. "A deal's a deal." The crowd looked between them. A few phones came out, recording. Someone whispered, "He's got him." Richard's face reddened. He took a step forward. "Listen, boy." The word hit the air like poison, and that was it. Every smile vanished. Every guest froze. Even the birds seemed to go silent. Derrick's eyes didn't move. He didn't yell. He didn't flinch. He just said, "You want to repeat that, sir?" Richard's wife tugged on his arm. "Richard, stop!" But the man was too angry to think. "I said, boy, you think you can come here and embarrass me in front of my friends? That's my car. You think some ex-mechanic gets to own a piece of my history?" The tension snapped. One of the guests, a woman in a navy blazer, stepped forward. "Richard, you made a public deal." Everyone heard it. He turned on her, furious. "Stay out of this." But Derrick just stood still. He could have walked away. He could have let it go. But this moment wasn't about the car anymore. He said quietly, "All my life, men like you looked at me and saw what you wanted. Someone small. Someone who should know his place." He paused. "But you just proved something, sir. The only thing broken here." "Wasn't the car," the crowd murmured. Richard's face went pale. Then a voice from behind said, "Derrick, I got the footage." It was the gardener, holding up his phone. Richard froze. The humiliation he'd planned for Derrick had turned into his own. And right there, standing in front of that beautiful roaring Corvette, Derrick realized this was far from over, because Richard wasn't done. Not by a long shot. When Derrick left that driveway, he thought the fight was over. But the next morning, he learned Richard Holloway wasn't just a man with money, he was a man with connections. And he was about to use every one of them. The next morning, the sun rose over Atlanta, but Derrick's phone was already buzzing before dawn. Dozens of missed calls, 2 voicemails from his workshop landlord, and one message that made his stomach drop. "Mr. Jackson, we need to talk about your lease." Effective immediately, the property's being repossessed. He sat on the edge of his bed, stunned. His garage, the one he'd built from scratch, Gone overnight? He tried calling back, but the landlord wouldn't answer. When he drove over, the gate was chained shut. A big, red notice of seizure sign hung on the door. Derrick just stared. All his tools, his customer files, his entire life's work, locked behind that steel door. He didn't need to ask who was behind it. He already knew. 2 hours later, he was standing outside Richard Halloway's estate again. The Corvette gleamed near the driveway, spotless now, like nothing had ever happened. But Derrick's heart was pounding. Richard came out smiling like a man who'd just won a chess match. "Well, well, look who's back," he said. "What brings you here? Looking for a job?" Derrick's jaw clenched. "You had my shop shut down." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Me? Oh no, I just made a few calls. You see, Atlanta's a small town if you know the right people." He sipped his drink. "You embarrassed me, Derrick, in front of my friends. You think that comes without a price?" Derrick took a step closer. "You said the car was mine." Richard smirked. "Did I? I don't recall signing anything." There it was, the real trap. The deal had never been meant to stand. It was bait, to humiliate him in public. And now that Derrick had turned the tables, Richard was using power, not pride, to destroy him. Derrick's voice stayed steady. "You're a coward," he said softly. "You think money makes you untouchable." Richard laughed. "Money doesn't make me untouchable, son. Power does." Then he leaned closer. "And that's something you'll never have." Derrick didn't reply. He just stared at him, silent, calm, but burning inside. When he turned to leave, Richard shouted after him, "Oh, and I'll be keeping that Corvette. Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself with something you clearly can't afford." The words sliced deep, but Derrick didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. He drove away in his pickup, hands tight on the wheel, eyes set ahead. Every mile between him and that mansion was fuel for something bigger than revenge, because Derrick wasn't done. He wasn't going to fight Richard's power with anger. He was going to fight it with truth, and he knew exactly how. That night he sat in his small apartment, laptop open, watching the video the gardener had sent him. Every frame, every word Richard said, the arrogance, the racism, the humiliation, it was all there. He clicked upload. The video title read, "Billionaire promises me his Corvette, then calls me boy when I win." He hit publish and went to sleep. By sunrise, the video had 1,000 views. By noon, 100,000. And by that night, the story had exploded nationwide. But with fame came danger, and Derrick was about to find out what happens when you expose the powerful. By the time the sun climbed over the Atlanta skyline, Derrick's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, he thought it was a glitch. Then he opened it and froze. 1,000 new notifications. The video had gone viral overnight. Millions of people were watching him. The clip of the Corvette roaring to life, the crowd's stunned faces, and that one word, boy. It had spread like wildfire. Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, everywhere. Someone had clipped the confrontation into a 30-second highlight. It was trending under YG Corvette racism and YG Derrick Jackson. The comments poured in. He handled that with class. That billionaire got what he deserved. This is why we record everything. Respect to this man for keeping calm under that kind of hate. Derrick scrolled, stunned. He didn't post the video to go viral. He posted it for truth. But now the whole country was watching. Then came the news alerts. Local mechanic humiliated by millionaire, then outsmarts him on camera. Atlanta billionaire faces backlash after racist remarks. TV anchors debated it. Podcasts covered it. Even major outlets were calling for statements. Derrick's workshop address leaked online. His inbox flooded with interview requests. And buried under them came the threats. "You should have stayed quiet. You think you can ruin a man like that and walk away? Be careful who you embarrass, boy." He shut his laptop, heartbeat pounding. He didn't know if they were just trolls or something worse. But the fear didn't last long, because right then his phone rang. A familiar voice said, "Derrick, it's me, Carlos, from the old Army days." Carlos had become an auto journalist for a major online magazine. "Man, you just blew up the internet," he said. "I saw the clip. You did nothing wrong, but you need to be careful. People like Richard Holloway don't lose quietly. Derrick sighed. He already took my shop. What else can he do? Carlos was silent for a moment. Derrick. He's on the board of the County Business Council, the same council that issues mechanic permits. Derrick froze. It hit him like a gut punch. Without a valid permit, he couldn't legally run a garage anywhere in the city. By noon, reporters surrounded Richard's mansion. He released a statement through his attorney. This entire story is exaggerated. The mechanic misrepresented himself. No racial slur was used. The video was edited to defame my character. Derrick's jaw clenched when he read it. Edited? Defame. He opened his phone again. The original video was still online, but something strange appeared. A copyright claim. Video removed due to privacy violation. Just like that, it vanished. He tried re-uploading it, taken down again within minutes. The billionaire was fighting back, not with truth, but with influence. And it was working. The tides online began to shift. Some comments started saying, maybe the video was fake. He's just chasing clout. The very people who had lifted him up were now doubting him. That night, Derrick sat alone in his dark apartment, watching the world twist his truth. But even through the fear, the anger, and the exhaustion, he refused to quit. Because if there was one thing he learned from the army, you don't back down just because the fight gets dirty. He looked out the window, whispering to himself, "You wanted to silence me, Richard. But you just gave me a bigger audience." Then he picked up his phone and made a call that would change everything. The man who answered Derrick's call wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a mechanic either. He was someone who had taken down powerful men before, and he was about to help Derrick expose the truth for the world to see. Derrick's thumb hovered over the screen before he hit call. The number rang twice. Then a calm, steady voice answered. Elliot Brooks. Derrick exhaled. "It's me, Derrick Jackson. Carlos said you might be able to help." There was a pause. Then Elliot said, "I've been expecting your call." Elliot Brooks wasn't a lawyer in the traditional sense. He was a civil rights attorney who'd made his name fighting impossible cases, the kind people said couldn't be won. Big corporations, influential families, police departments that buried evidence. He'd gone up against all of them and walked away with justice more often than not. "I watched your video before it disappeared," Elliot said. "They can't hide it forever. You have the original file, right?" Derrick nodded. "I do." "Good," Elliot replied. "Then they've already lost. They just don't know it yet." That night, Derrick met him downtown in a quiet diner that smelled like coffee and rain. Elliot slid a notepad across the table. "Tell me everything, from the start." So Derrick did, from the driveway humiliation, to the engine's roar, to Richard's public meltdown, to his shop being shut down and the video takedown. Elliot didn't interrupt once. When Derrick finished, the lawyer leaned back, thoughtful. "What Richard did wasn't just racist," Elliot said. "It was defamation, retaliation, and malicious interference. He used his influence to destroy your livelihood." He looked him dead in the eyes. "And that's a crime." Derrick blinked. "You think we can actually beat him?" Elliot smiled faintly. "Derrick, I don't fight to think I can win. I fight to make sure I do." Within hours, Elliot's team began working. They filed motions to preserve the digital evidence. They contacted the news outlets that had covered the story. And, most importantly, they reached out to the gardener who had recorded the original video. The man was scared at first. "I don't want no trouble," he said nervously over the phone. Elliot reassured him. "You won't have any trouble. You'll have protection. What you did, that was courage." Meanwhile, Richard Holloway sat in his mansion, surrounded by lawyers of his own. The story had gone national again, this time, with a new headline: "Civil rights attorney takes on billionaire in viral racism case." His assistant whispered, "Sir, this is getting serious. The media's digging into your past contracts." Richard slammed his glass on the table. "They won't find anything. I built this city. I own it." But deep down, for the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar: fear. Because the more he tried to silence Derrick, the louder the story grew. People weren't just watching a mechanic and a millionaire anymore. They were watching a symbol, a man standing up to everything money was supposed to protect. 2 days later, Derrick received an email from a major network. They wanted him live on television. "Tell your story," the producer wrote. unedited. Your words. He hesitated. Then he thought about his shop, his dad's voice, the humiliation he'd swallowed all his life, and he said yes. Elliot smiled when he heard. This is your moment, Derrick. Just be yourself. The truth's already powerful. It just needs a voice. Derrick looked up from his phone. Then it's time they hear mine. The night of the live interview, millions tuned in. But as Derrick spoke the truth on air, Richard Holloway was watching too. And what he did next would turn the story from viral drama into a national reckoning. The studio lights were bright, almost blinding. Derrick sat across from the host, a woman known for asking the tough questions. Her tone was calm, but her eyes were sharp. Tonight, she began, we're joined by Derrick Jackson, the Army veteran and mechanic whose video has sparked a national debate about racism, power, and accountability. Cameras zoomed in. The world was watching. Derrick took a breath, his palms sweaty. He'd been in combat zones before, but this felt different. This wasn't bullets. This was judgment. The host leaned forward. Derrick, millions saw your video before it was taken down. Can you tell us what really happened that day? He nodded slowly, and then he told the story. Every painful, humiliating detail, how Richard Holloway mocked him in front of his friends, how the bet was a setup, how he'd fixed the car anyway, and how, when he proved them wrong, he was called boy. The audience was silent. Every word landed like a hammer. I wasn't mad because of the word, Derrick said softly. I was mad because of the look that came with it. The one that says, you'll never be equal. You can win, but you'll still lose. The host nodded. That's powerful. And after that, he told them about the retaliation, the shop closure, the threats, the video takedown. When he finished, he looked straight into the camera. I don't want pity, he said. I just want fairness. You can't build a world on respect if only one side gets to have dignity. Back at his mansion, Richard Holloway watched the interview unfold on a 70-inch TV. His face was red with anger. Turn that off, he barked. But his assistant didn't move. Sir, she said quietly, you should hear this. Richard's phone began ringing non-stop. Reporters, investors, and then, the one call he didn't expect, his board chairman. Richard, the man said coldly, we need to talk. This is bad. Stockholders are panicking. You need to issue a public apology. Apologize? Richard spat. To him? Never. But the voice on the other end didn't flinch. If you don't, you're done here. The board's already voting to remove you from the foundation. For the first time, Richard felt the walls closing in. The empire he'd built on arrogance and fear was starting to crumble. Meanwhile, the interview kept spreading. Clips of Derrick's words were shared everywhere. You can't build a world on respect if only one side gets to have dignity. Thousands reposted it. Churches, schools, veteran groups, even celebrities joined in. His story had become bigger than him, but with the spotlight came the shadows. Elliot called him right after the broadcast. Great job, he said, but stay alert. When powerful men lose control, they get desperate. Derrick frowned. You think he'll come after me? I think, Elliot said grimly. He already has. The next morning, Derrick woke up to a smashed truck window, his tires slashed, and a note tucked under the wiper blade. Walk away, Jackson, or we'll make you. He stood in the driveway staring at it, anger simmering under his calm. He wasn't scared anymore. He was done being silent. He looked up at the rising sun and whispered, You tried to humiliate me in public, Richard. Now I'll make you answer in court. And that's exactly what he and Elliot set out to do next. As Derrick prepared for the lawsuit, shocking new evidence surfaced. Something hidden in Richard's past that could destroy his entire empire. But exposing it came with a cost Derrick never expected to pay. Elliot's office buzzed with quiet intensity, stacks of papers, coffee cups gone cold, a digital whiteboard filled with names, dates, and connections that all traced back to one man, Richard Holloway. Derrick sat across from him, tired but alert. He hadn't slept properly in days. Every night he replayed that word, boy, over and over. But now it wasn't pain fueling him. It was purpose. Elliot walked in holding a flash drive. We found something, he said. He plugged it into his laptop, the screen flickering to life. On the screen was a series of emails, internal memos from Richard's construction company. The dates went back years. And the contents were worse than either of them expected. One email read, Don't hire anyone from the West Side zip codes. Too risky, especially African Americans. Clients prefer a certain look. Another. Keep the black contractors on short-term contracts. They make the union nervous. And then a final one. The smoking gun. A message from Richard himself. If that mechanic goes public with his story, shut him down. I don't care how. Pull his business license, call the banks, make him disappear. The room went silent. Derrick's hands clenched into fists. This is it, Elliot said quietly. This is proof. Retaliation. Racism. Abuse of power. Everything. Derrick stared at the screen, disbelief mixing with fury. He tried to erase my life over pride. Elliot nodded. And he's been doing it to others for years. You're just the first one who fought back. They immediately filed for a civil lawsuit and attached the leaked evidence. Elliot's team reached out to former employees, and one by one, people began to come forward. A black foreman who was fired after asking for equal pay. A Latina architect denied credit for her designs. A single mother who was offered money to stay quiet. Each story built a wall of truth around Richard that money couldn't break. But as they prepared the case, Derrick received another message, this time from an anonymous number. You think you've won? Check your email. He opened his inbox. Attached was a document, photos from his army file, personal ones, private, and below them a message. Drop the case, or your past goes public. He called Elliot immediately. They're trying to smear me. Elliot sighed. Classic tactic. When they can't discredit the truth, they attack the person saying it. But what if they're right? Derrick said quietly. There's nothing in my file to be ashamed of, but you know how people twist things. Elliot's voice hardened. Listen, Derrick, they already took your shop. They already called you names. They already tried to make you small. You want to know what scares them? Derrick didn't answer. Elliot leaned forward. The fact that you're still standing. That's what they can't control. The next morning, the lawsuit hit every major news outlet. Mechanic sues billionaire for racism and retaliation. Explosive emails leaked. Cable news anchors dissected the story. Protests formed outside Holloway Industries. Investors began withdrawing support. And for the first time, Derrick wasn't fighting alone. Strangers sent him messages of hope. Other small business owners reached out, sharing similar stories of discrimination. The movement was growing, bigger than any one man. But with every headline, the threats got worse. Anonymous letters, blocked calls, unmarked cars parked near his apartment. Elliot told him, They're trying to shake you. Don't let them. Derrick nodded, eyes steady. I won't. Not now. Not after all this. He looked down at the flash drive still in Elliot's hand. This right here, Derrick said, isn't just my story anymore. It's everyone's. And as he said those words, the news ticker on the TV behind them flashed breaking news. Court date set, Holloway versus Jackson, the case America's waiting for. The courtroom would decide the truth, but before the trial even began, a shocking witness came forward. Someone who once worked for Richard and knew everything. The courthouse was already swarming with reporters by sunrise. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Every news network in the country had a crew parked outside. The world wanted to see Derrick Jackson versus Richard Holloway. Inside, the marble floors echoed with tension. Derrick adjusted his tie, his only one, while Elliot organized the files on the table. You ready? The lawyer asked. Derrick gave a faint smile. I've been ready since the day he called me boy. But before opening statements began, a quiet commotion stirred near the courtroom doors. A woman in her 50s walked in, her hands trembling as she clutched a brown folder. She wore a simple gray suit, modest, nervous, out of place among the polished attorneys. She whispered something to the bailiff, who immediately walked over to Elliot. Sir, he said, this woman says she has evidence related to the case. Elliot frowned. What kind of evidence? The woman stepped forward. My name is Claire Jenkins. I used to work for Mr. Holloway, in accounting. Her voice shook, but her eyes burned with conviction. I saw what he did to people like Derrick. I helped process the payments, hush money, settlements, business buyouts to cover his tracks. She held up the folder, and I kept copies. Elliot's eyes widened. You realize what this means? Clara nodded. I'm tired of being scared. When the judge entered, the courtroom fell silent. Derrick sat behind the plaintiff's table, heart pounding. Across the aisle, Richard Holloway adjusted his designer cufflinks and smirked. like the trial was just another business meeting. But that smirk began to fade when Elliot stood up. "Your Honor," he said, "the plaintiff calls a new witness, Ms. Clara Jenkins." The courtroom buzzed. Even the reporters stopped typing. Richard leaned toward his lawyers, whispering harshly, "Who is that?" When Clara took the stand, her hands trembled, but her voice grew steadier with every word. "I worked for Mr. Holloway for 12 years, she began. "During that time, I was instructed to falsify financial records and process payments to silence discrimination complaints." Elliot leaned forward. "Can you specify what kind of complaints?" "Yes," Clara said, flipping open the folder. "Racial discrimination, unequal pay, and intimidation tactics, especially against employees who were Black or Hispanic." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. Elliot gestured toward the folder. "And you have a proof?" "I do. Emails, check copies, even voice recordings." Richard's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a last-minute ambush." But the judge cut him off. "Overruled. If the evidence is relevant, the court will review it." Richard's face turned crimson. He glared at Clara, seething. "You'll regret this." Clara met his stare for the first time in years. "No," she said softly. "You will." After her testimony, Elliot leaned over to Derrick. "This changes everything. It's not just your word against his anymore. It's patterned abuse. A history of it." But Derrick didn't smile. He looked at Clara, tears welling in her eyes as she stepped down from the witness stand. "People like her," he whispered. "They're the real heroes." Elliot nodded, and they just tipped the balance. Outside, the world exploded again. Headlines blared across every screen. "New witness exposes years of racism at Holloway Industries." "Courtroom gasps as insider confirms retaliation scheme." Reporters surrounded Clara as she exited the building. "Why now?" one asked. She looked straight into the camera. "Because silence protects the wrong people." That night, Derrick sat on his couch watching the replay of her words. He didn't know if they'd win the case yet, but for the first time in his life he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Hope, because the truth wasn't buried anymore. It was standing tall, under oath for the world to see. But the fight wasn't over. The next morning, Richard's team played their own hand, twisting Derrick's past and turning public opinion against him. What they revealed in court, he almost broke him. The next morning, the courthouse felt different, colder. Reporters who had smiled at Derrick yesterday now whispered behind their cameras. Something had changed overnight. Elliot noticed it too. "Keep your head up," he muttered as they walked in. "Whatever they pulled, we'll handle it." But as soon as they stepped through the courtroom doors, the truth hit like a brick. Richard's lawyer was standing confidently, waving a thick manila folder. "Your Honor," he said, "before we proceed, we'd like to submit new evidence questioning the credibility of the plaintiff, Mr. Derrick Jackson." Elliot stiffened. "What evidence?" he demanded. The opposing attorney smiled like a shark. "His military record." They dimmed the lights. The screen behind them flickered to life, showing a photo of Derrick in uniform, proud, strong, 20 years old. Then another slide. A disciplinary report. Then another. A headline from years ago. "Army mechanic suspended after dispute with superior officer." The lawyer began his speech. "Mr. Jackson has a history of defiance toward authority, aggressive behavior, insubordination, and now he accuses my client, a respected businessman, of racism because he can't handle discipline." Gasps rippled through the room. Derrick sat frozen. That report, it wasn't what it seemed. But how could he explain it now, under the glare of the entire country? Elliot jumped up. "Objection! That report was dismissed and sealed years ago. It has no bearing on this case." The judge hesitated. "Objection sustained, but the court will allow limited context for credibility." Richard's lawyer smirked. He'd already planted the seed. Derrick leaned toward Elliot, whispering, "They twisted it. I stood up for a fellow soldier, a Black private who was being harassed. They called it insubordination. That's all this is." Elliot put a hand on his shoulder. "I know, but right now, the public doesn't." Outside, the damage spread fast. Talk shows spun the story. Headlines screamed, "Derrick Jackson, hero or hothead." Social media split in two. Some defended him, others mocked him. Derrick's phone buzzed non-stop. Friends from the Army reached out in anger. "You know what happened wasn't your fault," one text read. Don't let them rewrite it. But the weight of it all pressed hard. He could handle being insulted by strangers, but seeing the world doubt his integrity, that cut deeper than anything. That night, he sat alone in his apartment, the TV light flickering across his face. His shop was gone. His reputation was under attack. And the man who started it all, Richard Holloway, was still smirking in court. Elliot called him. "Don't let them win by silence," he said. "Tomorrow you take the stand. You tell your story your way." Derrick hesitated. "What if nobody believes me anymore?" "Then," Elliot said softly, "at least they'll hear the truth. And sometimes, that's all a good man can give." The next morning, Derrick walked into court wearing his old Army pin, the one his unit gave him after saving 3 men during an engine fire overseas. He wasn't just a mechanic or a victim. He was a soldier who'd survived worse battles than this. When the judge called his name, he rose and took the stand. Every eye in the room was on him. Cameras zoomed in. Even Richard leaned forward, eager to watch him crumble, but Derrick didn't flinch. He looked straight ahead and said in a steady voice, "Let me tell you what really happened that day." The courtroom went silent as Derrick began to speak, revealing a truth about his past that not only cleared his name, but shattered Richard's carefully built defense. The courtroom fell silent. Cameras stopped clicking. Even Richard's smirk faltered as Derrick took a deep breath and began to speak. He didn't sound like a man defending himself. He sounded like someone reclaiming his story. "I joined the Army at 19, Derrick said, voice calm, steady. "I wasn't rich. I wasn't connected. But I believed in something, that hard work and honor meant something in this country." He paused, glancing briefly toward Richard. That belief was tested one day, overseas. A young private, the only black mechanic in our unit besides me, was being taunted by one of our commanding officers. Called slurs, mocked, threatened. The courtroom tensed. Reporters leaned in closer. I reported it. I stood up for him, and they didn't like that. So they wrote me up for insubordination. Said I was disrespecting authority. Derrick's eyes hardened. "I didn't fight because I hate authority. I fought because I respect justice. And if that makes me defiant, then so be it." Elliot nodded proudly, letting the silence linger. Then he asked, "And what did you do after leaving the military?" "I built my business from nothing. Worked double shifts. Fixed cars in the cold when I couldn't afford heat. I hired people no one else would hire. Veterans, single moms, ex-cons, because everyone deserves a second chance." He turned to the jury. "I didn't ask for trouble with Mr. Holloway. I just asked to be treated like a man." A murmur ran through the gallery. Soft gasps, whispers. Even some of Richard's supporters looked shaken. Richard's lawyer tried to twist it. "So you're saying your entire record, the suspensions, the warnings, they were all misunderstandings?" Derrick looked right at him. "No, I'm saying I learned who I was through them. You can punish a man for standing up once, but you can't keep him down forever." Elliot smiled. "Your Honor, the plaintiff rests his case." When Derrick stepped down, people actually clapped, quietly at first, then louder, until the judge banged his gavel for order. But it didn't matter. The tide had shifted. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded him again. "Mr. Jackson, what do you want from this lawsuit?" He stopped, thought for a moment, and said, "I don't want revenge. I want acknowledgement. I want every man and woman who's ever been disrespected because of their color to know they're not crazy. It's real. And it's wrong." Cameras flashed like lightning. Social media erupted. Hashtags exploded across the internet. Like "Stand with Derrick," "Eat Justice for the Mechanic." But Richard wasn't done. That night, his legal team filed a counterclaim, accusing Derrick of defamation and claiming he was the real victim. News anchors debated both sides. Pundits argued. Online trolls called Derrick a liar. Elliot paced their office. "It's a stall tactic," he said. "They're desperate. If we push forward with Clara's evidence, this whole empire falls." Derrick nodded slowly. "I didn't start this fight," he said, "but I'm damn sure going to finish it." The next morning, the judge called for final arguments. Everything, every insult, every injustice, every sleepless night had led to this moment. And before walking into the courtroom, Derrick turned to Elliot and said, "Win or lose, they'll remember today." Elliot smiled. "They will, because the truth's finally louder than their money." The final verdict would shake the courtroom, but not before Richard tried one last ruthless move, a move that backfired in a way no one saw coming. The courtroom was packed for the final day, every seat taken. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras poised for history. Derrick sat quietly beside Elliot, staring down at his hands. Calloused, scarred, honest hands. Hands that had fixed engines, not destroyed lives. Across the room, Richard Holloway looked different now. The smugness was gone. His tie was loosened. His eyes darted nervously toward the jury. But as the judge entered, Richard's lawyer stood abruptly. "Your Honor," he said, "before closing arguments, my client wishes to make a statement." Elliot frowned. "A stunt," he muttered under his breath. The judge sighed. "Proceed, Mr. Holloway." Richard rose slowly, buttoning his jacket. He turned to face the jury, voice smooth, practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I've spent my life building businesses that employ hundreds. I've donated to charities. I've supported this community, and now I'm accused of racism, a word thrown around far too easily these days." He paused for effect. "I'm not a perfect man, but this is a witch hunt. A desperate attempt by a bitter ex-employee to destroy what I built." He glanced at Derrick. "He calls me racist, but I saw him yell at my staff. I saw him lose his temper. I gave him a chance, and this is how he repays me." Some people in the audience murmured. The words sounded convincing, until Elliot stood up. "Your Honor," Elliot said calmly, "we have a recording." The judge raised an eyebrow. "A recording?" Elliot nodded. "Yes, from Ms. Jenkins. The one Mr. Holloway didn't know she had." The bailiff dimmed the lights. Elliot pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room, cold, unmistakable. "I don't care if the guy's a veteran or a genius. I'm not putting a black man at the front of my company. Not with my name on the sign." The room froze. Every whisper, every breath, gone. Elliot turned toward the jury. "That," he said softly, "isn't ambition. That's hate." Richard lunged from his seat. "Where did you get that?" "That's illegal." The judge slammed his gavel. "Order, Mr. Holloway, sit down." But it was too late. The mask had shattered. Derrick didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The truth was louder than anything he could have spoken. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood tall. "In the matter of Jackson versus Holloway Industries, we find the defendant liable for racial discrimination and retaliation." Gasps filled the courtroom. Derrick closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he'd been holding for years. Elliot gripped his shoulder. "You did it, man. You won." Richard collapsed into his chair, pale and trembling. Everything he'd built, his company, his image, his power, unraveled in a single sentence. Outside, the crowd erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed like fireworks. But Derrick didn't linger. He stepped to the podium, eyes steady, voice quiet but sure. "I didn't fight this battle for revenge," he said. "I fought it because silence keeps people chained. If you're watching this, don't let anyone tell you your worth depends on their comfort." He looked straight into the camera. "Racism hides behind money, behind charm, behind power. But when you shine truth on it, it burns." As he walked away, Elliot caught up to him. "You just changed lives," he said. Derrick smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I just wanted to fix one thing." Elliot chuckled. "And you did. Just not the kind of engine you're used to." They both laughed, not out of victory, but release. That night, news outlets replayed the verdict on a loop. Clara Jenkins received protection and praise for her courage. Richard's empire crumbled under lawsuits and investigations. And Derrick? He reopened his shop, this time bigger, stronger, community-funded. He hung a new sign outside the garage, Jackson Motors, where respect comes standard. But even after justice, Derrick learned that healing isn't instant. In the final chapter, he faces the deeper truth that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's freedom. Months passed after the verdict, but for Derrick, peace didn't come overnight. Justice had been served. Yes. The court had spoken. The world had seen the truth. But inside, there was still a storm. Every time he walked past his new garage, he saw flashes of the past, the first shop, the laughter with his crew, the moment Richard called him boy. Some wounds don't heal with applause. They heal with time. One evening, Derrick closed up the shop late. The streets were quiet, the air cool and soft. He was locking the gate when a car pulled up beside him, a black sedan with tinted windows. He froze, every muscle tense. But then the door opened. It wasn't who he expected. It was Richard's son. The young man stepped out, awkward and hesitant. He looked nothing like his father. Clean-cut, nervous, holding something in his hands. "Mr. Jackson?" he said quietly. Derrick nodded. "Yeah, what do you want?" The young man swallowed hard. "I came to say, I'm sorry for what my father did, for what he taught me." He held out a small metal keychain, an old Corvette emblem. "My dad used to keep this in his office. Said it reminded him of power. But when I saw how he used that power, I couldn't stand by anymore. I testified in one of the follow-up cases. I just thought, you should have this." Derrick stared at it for a long time. That same emblem had once been a symbol of arrogance. Now it felt like closure. He took it slowly. "Your father ever apologize?" The young man looked down. "He's in hiding. Can't face what he did," Derrick sighed. "That's the thing about men like him. They can't handle losing, even when it's right." The young man nodded, tears in his eyes. "I don't want to be him." Derrick placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then don't be. Learn from what broke him." After the car drove away, Derrick stood in the silence holding the emblem under the streetlight. He smiled faintly. Not because he forgave Richard, but because he forgave himself, for the anger, for the sleepless nights, for ever believing he was less. He whispered to himself, "You made it, old man." The next morning, he hung the Corvette emblem on the wall of his office, right above the words painted in white. No hate, no fear, just work. His shop became more than a business. It became a haven, a place where young black apprentices, veterans, immigrants, and dreamers came to learn, to rebuild, to rise. And every time a customer asked about the emblem, Derrick would grin and say, "That's from the man who once told me I couldn't." Months later, a reporter visited for a follow-up story. "Mr. Jackson," she asked, "what's the biggest lesson you learned from all this?" Derrick leaned back, wiping grease from his hands. "That power without respect is worthless," he said. "People think racism dies in courtrooms, but it dies when we start seeing each other, really seeing each other." He looked straight into the camera. "So if you're watching this, remember, speak up, even when your voice shakes, because silence doesn't protect you. It just protects them." He smiled then, the kind of smile that comes after a storm, tired but free. Outside, his crew laughed, music played, the sound of engines filled the air. Life moved on, and for the first time in a long time, Derrick felt something deeper than victory: peace. Racism thrives in silence and power thrives in fear. But truth has a sound that never fades. Derrick didn't win because he was perfect. He won because he refused to be silent. What would you have done in Derrick's place? Would you have fought back or walked away? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories about resilience, justice, and the fight against discrimination.